Ichneumon Druid is pretty weird. It's a 1/1 creature that costs 1 and 2 green mana. Ichneumon Druid deals 4 damage to any opponent casting an instant. This does not apply to the first instant cast by that opponent in each turn. That's very interesting for a green card. Now, this card did come out in Legends, which has a lot of cards that feel dissonant with the current interpretation of the color pie. I don't know if I would call this card a color break, but it is definitely a strange effect for a green card. There are some examples of green dealing damage, but most of these either deal damage to flying creatures or are some form of the fight mechanic, where creatures will deal their power as damage to each other. Green cards that deal damage to players are pretty rare, unless you count creatures attacking, but obviously we're not counting just like getting hit by a grizzly bear. Now, I may have missed a few, but as far as I know, the only green cards that deal direct damage to a player are Hurricane, a card originally in Alpha, Ichneumon Druid from Legends, Thorn Thalid from Fallen Empires, Unyaro Bee Sting from Mirage, and Hornet Sting from M11. That's 5 cards, which is not many when you compare it to the number of cards that currently exist, which has got to be around like 20,000 by this point. I didn't do a deep dive looking through every card to find every example of green direct damage or green burn, but I do think it's safe to say that this is not a common green effect. I do think this card is really cool though. 4 damage is a lot, and this card reads fairly powerful, but it really isn't that good. I guess if you're playing against the right kind of storm deck or something, this is really funny, but since it doesn't care about the first instant is likely to be removal. This effect is pretty niche, and niche effects do have a tendency to not do well, especially when those niche effects are just punishing things that are otherwise pretty niche. Instants are really strong cards because they offer a lot of versatility, especially when you have 2 instants in hand and only enough mana to cast one of them. Because they are instants, you can simply not play either until your opponent's end step, so that you can make the decision right before you untap and after you had a chance to see what your opponent was going to do. Or you could also, if one of them was like a removal spell, respond at that point, right? Either way, that's very valuable, but in that situation, you only played 1 instant. There are decks that want to play multiple instants per turn, but there aren't that many decks that require doing that to win, and often a deck with a lot of instants that does require it to win will have some level of burn or creature removal, and this 1/1 is pretty easy to deal with. It also doesn't care if you have sorceries, making this effect even less likely to actually be useful. I really like this card, but I'm pretty certain this card is not that great. There are definitely situations where this card can be sick as hell, but it's just such a niche ability. It's also worth noting that this card has gotten better, because this card was made when interrupts existed. So if your opponent used 2 counter spells to skip your turn, Ichneumon Druid wouldn't give a shit. I'm not actually certain what problem this card was supposed to be solving. My gut reaction is probably something like Lightning Bolt, since those were pretty common and very strong, but like, just use your first Lightning Bolt on the Druid. Problem solved. Big easy. GG. At the time of Legends, I'm not even sure what instants were so oppressive and showing up constantly. I guess Ancestral Recall was around a bit during the time, but like, how likely are they to cast 2 Ancestral Recalls in a turn, and even if they do, you did 4 damage and they drew 6 cards? And sure, maybe they played Ancestral Recall in another instant, right? Like, so there are situations, but this does not happen as often as you might think, is my point. And especially doesn't happen as often as you might think when there is a card on the table that says, hey, I'm gonna deal 4 damage to you when you play your second instant. Yeah, I don't know. It doesn't even do anything against the combos that were available at the time, because at the time of Legends, off the top of my head, I can think of 3 main combos that you could do. The obvious being Channel Fireball, but those are sorceries, and this wouldn't do anything against that anyways, because you'd take, what, 8 damage and die? Well, I guess it would do something against channel because of they're paying their life. Except it doesn't because none of those are instants. And the other really busted combo available in alpha is to use an animate artifact on a time vault and attach and instill energy to it. Boom, infinite turns, go off, king. And the third combo was all that I think was technically available is you could make infinite mana with Basalt Monolith and Power Artifact, but I'm not actually sure when it became obvious that you could do that or if it even worked within the rules at the time. My point here is that none of that uses a bunch of instants, so I'm really not sure what strategy the guy who made this card lost to, because it just feels like such an interesting card that doesn't even do anything. Still, it's not all terrible. This is effectively a soft Stax piece of sorts, and this card can definitely shut some strategies down. I'm also maybe just being a bit too critical of the design of early Magic. It's just as likely that this card was just a vague idea they tried because they thought it was interesting, and there wasn't really any problem they were trying to solve, they were just trying to make an interesting card. It's hard to say, but either way, Ichneumon Druid has always fascinated me. I've never heard another person even talk about this card, and if I've ever seen it mentioned on any of the old Usenet posts or anything, it was in a lot of cards being sold. So I have no idea what other people thought of this card or how it was used. Now, the answer to that is they probably didn't think about it and they didn't use it, but I don't know that. So if you've ever played this bad boy or knew someone who did, was it ever good? Is there something stupid obvious that I'm missing here? I'd really like to hear what you guys think on this one because I really like this card. I think it's fun and neat and it sounds badass, but I do think it ultimately falls flat in terms of like being useful. Still, I think it's a great example of how off the wall the Legends set is, and it's cards like this that make me love that set so much. And, big surprise, but there is only one printing of the green Burn Mage, and unless I'm misunderstanding Scryfall, this card isn't even available on Magic Online, which I guess makes sense, because like I said, I don't think it's good, but it is still kind of wild. You don't see that too often. Anyway, the art for Ichneumon Druid was done by Melissa A. Benson, who has done some fantastic pieces for Magic, and this one is also really sweet. I think the art for this card really does a great job selling the card's mechanics to me. That Druid looks ready to lightning bolt your ass, if you ask me. Melissa's work is always so cool to me. She favors heavy saturation and has this habit of having well-detailed art with weird anatomy, especially when it comes to some of the animals she's drawn. It's not always the case, as Ichneumon Druid is pretty well done, but a lot of her pieces have a weird vibe to them that I actually find endearing. And Ichneumon Druid is another one that is just awesome. This art is great. I'm a big fan. That's all I have to say on Ichneumon Druid, so now I'd like to hear what you guys think of this little weirdo. You can also like the video if you liked it. You can subscribe, I guess, if you give a shit, but either way, I hope you have a magical day. Thank you for watching.